Welcome to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America on WSGW. Now, here is your host, Kareem Bowen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. Today, we are finally in the swing of things. The weather has changed. We have had the Memorial Cup that is now in our distant rearview mirror, and we're looking forward to an amazing summer. The weather is good, and things are looking bright. This weekend is going to be amazing, and I say that for this weekend and every weekend until we get to October. It's going to be an amazing weekend, and we're going to have great fun. I'm in the studio today with my main man, John B. in the place to be. John, what's going on?
Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it is. That's what kind of day I'm having.
They've got John running all over the place. Not only does he produce, he does the news, he does casting, sports casting for hockey teams. He does it all.
That's done. Now that the Memorial Cup is done.
Now the Memorial Cup is done, but he is the quintessential man. He sits in on the morning show as a personality. John, how long have you been here?
Coming up on 3 years.
3
I was just
years.
thinking about that yesterday. Yeah.
Man, time flies.
It'll be 3 years in September.
3 years this September.
Yep.
And when he came in, he was green as a Smith Granny apple, and he jumped right into things. And before you know it, he became an asset and a necessity around the station. So, man, wow, great job on being consistent and making yourself invaluable, because I don't know what we would do without you at this point.
Well,
before we were like, we don't know if we want that kid or not. Now it's like, we don't want him to go. Please don't leave. But what are you thinking, John? What were you going to say?
I'm thinking it's exhausting being invaluable. So,
hey,
I'm on vacation this weekend, though. So,
really?
I'm excited. Yeah.
So that means you're actually getting time off.
Actually taking time off. Yeah.
We were about to call somebody about child labor laws being violated over here, because this kid does not stop. I shouldn't say kid, young man. He's now a homeowner. So
yeah.
He's so John, how has it been? I think this is interesting. Being a homeowner and now having all of the responsibility of the house. How does it feel?
I've got a list of projects that I've been putting off.
Okay.
And I think I can keep putting them off for at least another month. So I keep telling myself, once this next thing is done, then I'll get to all of that. But that's what having the responsibility's been like.
Wow. Well, hey, I can relate to that. And I think most men out there, we don't want to do those honeydew lists or those project lists that we have. We want to do the stuff that we want to do when we get home, which is actually just chill and vegetate for a little bit. Hang out in the backyard. I don't know what you do in the backyard, but it seems to be a hangout spot, or the garage, even better yet. You got a garage, John?
I got a pretty big garage.
Okay. Well,
that's one of the things on the list, though, is I got to clean it out. There's a bunch of stuff in there.
That becomes home base. The older you get, trust me. So treat your garage well. It becomes the place where you begin to live and realize that your life as a man, you got all you're going to get. But for those of you that are listening, we thank you guys for continually listening in. And thank you for those of you who are listening. It's like, wait a minute, my show seems to be the same show. There's been so much going on in our community. And really, it doesn't stop, but we have to force it to continue to some sense of normalcy. So I want to give a shout out to everyone who listens here to WSGW, listeners on 100.5 FM, and those who are listening at 790 AM. I don't understand why you would choose an AM station over an FM station. Is there a reason why people would do that?
AM's got more reach. So when I lived up in Standish, we got AM, but we didn't get FM.
And get up there on top of the roof and put some aluminum foil on it and turn it a little bit to the east, to the west, to the east. Remember the bunny ears on TVs?
Yeah.
So I guess people, if you're out in rural communities, it's a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get the AM stations probably better than the FM stations. Okay, thank you, John, for a little bit of understanding of what's going on around here. And then also for those of you at WJOL in Joliet, Illinois, we thank you. It's almost like the WJOL folks are in abyss. We don't know if they're out there or, is the tape sitting in file 13? What's happening? But
I keep sending the show to them. I haven't heard anything from them. So we hope you're hearing us.
So we hope you're hearing us. Why don't you send us an email, a message? Let us know, hey, we're down here. We're live. And we ran across this show, and we've listened in. So we thank you guys, everyone that's out there, for everything that's going on. I certainly am excited. I was really hoping that this week we might have a Mark Spotting in studio. But he's in transition from here to there, running companies and all that other great
proof
stuff.
of life. I got an email from him today.
You got an email?
Sorry, I won't be on the show, but he's alive. He's out there somewhere doing things.
Mark is alive. What we need to do, and this is how we get Mark back in the studio. We're going to stage a Christmas Aglow show. And we're going to say, hey, it is Christmas Aglow here at WSGW, and we have some amazing finds for Christmas get-ups. And I guarantee you we'll make sure that he's here.
I got excited. I thought you were going to say we're going to move the whole studio out to California.
Well, he's back here now.
He's back in Michigan
he's
now.
He's officially back in Michigan. And I need to check up on my buddy because I do miss him. And, it's funny because I thought about him. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but have you seen all of the shark sightings or the shark bites or shark attacks, whatever you want to call them, that have been happening all over the? You have not.
We don't get those in the Great Lakes.
Come on, I mean, but you don't pay attention to those things.
No.
And you're not a social media person.
I lurk. I don't.
You lurk
very much. Yeah.
Don't ever admit that again on the radio. Like, I lurk.
Being a social media lurker is different.
I don't do social media, but I lurk. The imagery that comes with that statement is not so good.
It's a generational
thing. Okay. But anyways, I've been looking and I've been blown away at all of the shark sightings. Like, they were talking about they're coming in to eat some, not krill, but some kind of fish that they're swarming at this time. And so as they're chasing these schools of small fish, the fish are going to shallow water. And so that's why they're there. And so they're taking bites out of legs and arms and buttocks and don't realize the difference between that and the little minnows that they've been chasing for hours. But this is indicative. When we talk about conversations of race in America, this is why Black folks be like, we good over here in the sand. We're going to enjoy a nice, cool beverage with an umbrella. We're going to look at the water, but we're going to chill over here on the land. Because what is not going to happen is that you will not catch us out in the water being eaten by sharks. If that should happen, I want someone to investigate it. If I'm ever told, hey, Kareem was bitten by a shark, check the story and do the investigation. I did not get in that water by myself. But it is interesting in terms of what's going on. Let's talk about what's hot off the press. And I hate this season, which is the political season, but it's everywhere. Have you been doing news? Is it not in your everyday news at this point?
It's pretty much in the everyday news, if not the local news, then the state news. I was just looking at all the primary ballots to see, because we've got guests on shows coming up, and I got to make sure that we're getting equal time to everybody. So I went through the primary ballots this morning.
I just if you're running for office, I canceled your show. I'll see you after November. We'll do something, because it is a lot of work to make sure that you get everybody in there. But anyways, so in the news, I wanted to talk really quick. And Jonathan, we don't necessarily, you've never really shared what you are. I always paint you as something.
Yeah. That's accurate.
I'm just being honest, but I always paint you as a not so Trumplican / conservative Republican, not enamored with Donald Trump, but that's your guy. That's your choice that you guys are having. You're sticking with it for now. That's how I always paint you into a picture. I've never really just said, hey, Jonathan, what you believe? By some of the things you say, I just make up my own definition. I've decided, hey, I'm in the media, news. What's the difference? We just make whatever up we want to make, right? But when you look at where the conversations that have been out there on blacks becoming Republicans, or blacks not necessarily becoming Republicans, but voting Republican, in particular, black men such as myself, not such as myself being the one that vote. I am very conservative, and I would vote for a Republican, but I ain't voting for this Republican. When you hear the conversations, they're saying, oh, Trump is polling 12%. 13%, 18%, 20%. Oh, he's going to get 20% of the black male vote. And you understand you understand politics, you understand the nuances of how polls happens.
You understand politics. Whoa. You're giving me way too much credit here, Kareem.
Once again, I'm telling you what you understand, okay? That's what I'm here for. What is your thought when you hear those types of things? What comes to mind when you hear that? Do you even give it much thought?
I've said it before. Trump's message appeals to people who feel that they've been forgotten, who feel that they are being crushed under the weight of something, the system, the man, the left.
What?
The
White
right,
people got a man now?
Whatever.
Okay.
And it appeals to people that feel that they need to fight back. And he's a fighter, and he gets in your corner of the ring, and he'll take on the establishment, and the establishment very clearly hates him. I agree with that.
Okay.
Like
okay, go ahead. Good. We'll go ahead.
Even before he was president, the establishment didn't like him when he was running for president. But I think that message of I'm the underdog, I'm the guy that's going to take the fight to drain the swamp, that whole thing. He's going to make some radical changes that appeals to people who feel that those radical changes need to be made, and they might not agree necessarily with the changes he plans to make, but they agree with someone doing something. And I think that's his message, whether it's accurate or not.
And so I understand what you're saying. So the thing that would be a curious note for Black conservative folk, or not even have to be conservative, but Black men, would be their ability to relate to him on the understanding of kind of being submerged underneath, quote unquote, the man, the system not having a fair shake, the system being used against you and politicized. And if you were this, okay, so look
at the Democratic Party. It represents that system pretty well. It represents that system, and it represents
what do you mean, what system?
If you're looking at the current administration and you're looking at re-electing them, do you expect anything to change and in any way? Do you expect any big benefits?
Well, what are we talking about now? Are we talking about getting stuff done in DC, or are we talking about the person who is at the helm in DC?
Both.
Okay. So how much of what happens in Washington do you contribute to the president himself?
Not much. And I think people incorrectly put way too much stock in who the president is. I think the president is more of a figurehead for his party at this point. That's all the office is. However, the power of executive orders and the executive power has been gradually increasing.
We're becoming a nation. We're becoming a nation of dictators
over the past
right
few
in order
decades.
About it. Right.
So yeah, it absolutely, they have that power. They don't use it that often. They use it still too often for my liking, but it's not.
I mean, over the past couple of decades, it's becoming very, very frequent.
But I think that when it comes to what the president actually does, it's more of a check on Congress, is what it's kind of supposed to be. It's changed, but I think Congress, and I think more importantly than looking at the national elections, and more importantly, especially the presidential election, is looking at what's happening in your own community. And we've said it before that you can only affect so much. Yes, your vote counts on the national stage. Your vote counts more in your city, in your township, in your county, in your state. So
your voice, your vote, your voice, your influence has a much bigger impact on a local election in your communities, in your state, than it does anywhere else. Well, because I was just interested because, hearing these things happen, and this is what's funny. Like I say that I'm a conservative. And I shouldn't say that completely, because I'm very conservative about some things, and then I'm very livable. I'm very livable.
Are you one of those?
I'm very livable.
Are you one of those fiscally conservative, socially liberal people?
I mean, I am. I would say that, and sometimes my socially liberal And I'm not. Well, let me clarify that, because I'm not. So it's kind of different.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily socially liberal. I'm probably more socially conservative.
Okay.
So I'm probably more socially conservative, and probably more fiscally liberal, or toward maybe just left of center. And the
Okay.
reason I say that is this: there are some social issues, and they're really not social. I think that they're economic, they're human rights issues that I think are necessary to fund. That may fall within that quagmire or the jar of political battling, and I would tend to move a little bit to the left on those things. As it relates to things such as abortion, I think I'm pretty clear about what I think that I am, as an individual, pro-choice as pro-choice can be, but I am, as a person, as pro-life as pro-life, if that makes sense. I am a pro-lifer. I believe in life. I believe once it's created, it should live. It, but I believe that people have a right to what happens with their body. And I think that from a political standpoint as well as a spiritual standpoint, I've never seen Jesus put anyone in a headlock anywhere in scripture. So he gave them the right to make their own decision, either choose him or to do what you want. And so, although I choose to believe that life is valuable, and not the fact that, someone hasn't, they don't see the value, but you don't, get rid of something that I think that you find a great value in, unless there's some extreme circumstances surrounding there. So we always have to give that caveat that, there may be issues, rape, incest, all those types of things that are important. But as it relates for me as a person, I believe that, hey, I want life to be the key thing. I just don't believe in forced compliance, because forced compliance is never loved. I don't want anyone to force to love me. And forced compliance is not really a belief in a system that you're a part of. And I think that we should all have a system, and maybe I'm here's where I'm seeing roses and fairies and fairy dust. I think we all should have a system that we feel comfortable with how we're able to operate in that system. So if you are pro-life, absolutely be pro-life, but don't beat someone up over the head if they have a difference of an opinion, and say, what we're going to do is we're going to change the laws and the courts and everything else so that you can't have the option that you think is best for you. I think that's kind of, what's the term? I can't think of it right now, but I don't think it's right. So that is one thing. But when it comes to issues and some of the things that we're fighting as it relates to how we relate to people and how we refer to people and how we call people and address people, I mean, I've never been, I want you to refer to me as Wolf. That doesn't, I don't understand that argument. And I think that's probably the best way to say it. I don't understand it. And people say, what you don't understand, you fear. I don't fear it. It just doesn't make sense to me. And so if someone can make that make sense, then maybe we could have that conversation. And I would be open for that conversation, but it just does not make sense to me, if that makes any sense. Okay.
That makes sense to me.
It doesn't make sense to anybody else, but it makes sense to us. Okay. That's all that matters. All right. So are Republicans coming home? No, they are. Republicans are coming home, or is it just the fear of Donald Trump? So many people who, for a period of time, there was probably a period of 2 months, that were kind of thinking, okay, we might be free from this guy. And I think this is why, while Nikki Haley was really making a stride and pulling in 15-20% of the vote, the people were thinking maybe there's life after Donald Trump, but that's gone away very quickly. And we see that Republicans, and I think that Democrats and Republicans kind of return to the center, or return to their base as we get closer. What do you think? I see you shaking your head.
I disagree with pretty much everything you just said.
So tell me. I
don't think Americans were allowed to think anything other than Trump is there and he's a big force. I think that the established media conglomerates have put all of their effort since he left office. Everything has been Donald Trump. Think about it. At least 3 times a week, you were seeing Donald Trump in the headlines.
Now, he should stop writing books about things and stop doing classes. The classes that he should run is how to be a marketing genius,
yes,
how to be relevant even when you're not present, because dude has been the voice of conversation, has been in the conversation from the time that he left. He's never left the main page, the front page.
No, and all publicity is good publicity. So
Spell my name right.
So people saying he's going to lose, he's going down in the polls, is just telling people who support him, who weren't voting for him or who weren't answering those polls, oh, I need to get more involved. Or the people who opposed him, like it just, I don't know, it just fired people up. I don't think there was ever an idea of Donald Trump is done. He's out of the running. I don't think that was ever a thing.
I thought maybe, I was hoping maybe that we could move past and that the Republicans could actually put together someone who is respectable. That because and I'll say this, I've said this a million times. To me, the president, even though he's a figurehead, even though we know that most politicians are not squeaky clean, but just I think that when you are the leader of the free world, that we should have someone who's aspirational, someone who makes us feel better about ourselves, even if, there's things going on. I mean, Clinton and his cigars, and, there's a whole list, Eisenhower on down, of the things that that have happened in the White House with presidents. But I mean, you can't have conversations about prostitutes and affairs and, Playboy. Those things are detrimental. So I personally believe that, as I said before, this whole thing with these 34 counts against him, that it was a waste of time. And I thought that it was not a good idea to even, I think I've said that a million times, this was not a good idea to go after these things because I think it's crazy. And I think that it has backfired on, I guess, well, I can't say that it was backfired because in order to say that, you have to say that this was a political stunt by the Democrats. And I really believe that this was a justice issue that was taken care of.
I'm going to disagree with that one.
Well, I mean, I know you will, because I think that that's what happens, but I don't think that that's any less. I think that there's no difference between that and the fact that we just recently seen Biden's son. Also, I mean, so either you have it one way or another. So I guess if then that would mean that Biden's situation would also be political. And I think they're both criminals.
The difference is the people who went after Trump are people who built their reputation and ran their campaigns in public office against, we're going to get this guy. And it was people, I
think that's a great way.
And it was people
I disagree
with.
I think that they noticed that he was doing things because they're in the city that he operates and he does business. It doesn't take an Einstein to recognize that he's got shady business deals all over the place, including the school that he set up that he was stealing money from. There's issues that exist with people who know him because they're in the proximity where he does business. And I think that's where it is. We're going to put a stop to him operating the way he was. But I'm sorry, go ahead, continue.
But you didn't see that kind of thing with Hunter Biden. It was just, there's charges out. There's a verdict out. Was there a big buildup that I?
Oh my gosh, are you like serious? The whole thing
I knew there were allegations and things, but the actual people who filed the charges and put things in motion.
This is almost an 8-year plan of investigation and actually malicious prosecution. I think if you keep digging on any of us, you probably can find somewhere where we've committed a crime. And the fact that they feel like, well, I feel that it was like, you got Donald, so we're going after your son. And
you're talking about like the whole laptop thing, I guess. Yeah, that was absolutely politically motivated.
Yeah, and it's crazy that our justice systems are being caught in the middle of what's going on. I wish both of these gentlemen. I mean, these are not candidates that the world loves, but I wish that we could enter back into a place where common decency, the nastiness could end at the end of the political system season, and that we return to some sense of normalcy. And I think at one point in time, there was a longing for that type of conversation. People who wanted common sense legislation. I think we've now abandoned that. And I think that people just want to win. I want to win because I think if our guy gets in, this happens. We want to win because if this guy gets in, he's the boogeyman. And I think that that's what's funny. Democrats are looking at Trump as the boogeyman. Republicans are looking at Trump as the savior. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back with more United Shades of Gray.
You're listening to United Shades of Gray on WSGW.
This is Kareem. We're back with more United Shades of Gray. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about racial disparities in America. Before we do that, I want to give a shout out to all of those individuals all over the nation that are preparing for Juneteenth celebrations. Once again, for those of you who are here, Juneteenth is the celebration of the finality, the complete celebration, quote unquote, and I say that with air asterisks, of all Black slaves, not just the ones that were freed with the Emancipation Proclamation, but also those who did not know that they were free by those standards, and then were told later, as the general came running into town, that, hey, the Emancipation was written a couple years ago. You guys are free to drop the cotton and keep on living. So Juneteenth is happening is a celebration of freedom. A celebration is an American celebration for African-American descendants of slaves. There are no other descendants, or should I say individuals that were brought here to this country that have given more than this particular group of folk, which I happen to be a proud ancestor and a proud descendant of. I don't want to be an ancestor, not just yet. I'm a little bit too young for that, but a proud descendant of that legacy. So celebration of Juneteenth, it's going in full moon, June 19th. So many great things happening in the city of Saginaw, in Michigan, Detroit, Illinois, Chicago, all over the place. Get involved and learn a little bit about your history. This is not just Black history. This is American history. And speaking of history, that is a great segue for us to enter into our conversation today as we begin to talk about racial disparities in America. And why is this important? Because I just want to throw some things out there just to add some context to where we're going with this conversation. And what I mean by that is this: we all understand in this amazing world that slavery was insidious, it was heinous, it was wrong, and it was something that is forever a stain on our country and our nation. And I understand that, and I don't want to downplay that as an ADOS, African American descendant of slaves. It is a very important part of my history, my culture, where I come from, and I embrace that wholly. And we know that from history, the lessons of history, that after the plantations, there were then the Jim Crow laws, which allowed folks that were supposedly free, that were homeless or didn't have a job. Those things became illegalities, and you could actually be in prison for those things. And so where did they work, or where did they end up going back? As indentured servants, now back to the same plantations that they were freed through. Jim Crow was an extension of the ideologies of slavery that existed through the civil rights, and we, because of that, have the due process amendments. We've got the 14th, the 15th amendments that were out of there, and with that, we begin to understand that Black individuals were not 3/5 human, but in fact, they were 100% human, full humans. And I always to say that in order for you to take away and to dehumanize individuals, you've got to take away their humanity. And in order to keep them enslaved, you've got to take away their understanding of who they are, their ideologies, their thoughts, their reasoning, their desire to promote themselves. And that was what took place during slavery, and that continued through Jim Crow. And then we see a great movement, which was called the Civil Rights Movement, that brought forth the freedoms that Blacks had been desirous of for a very long time. So now moving in, we've now have the opportunity to go to school. We see now the opportunity to own land. There was a promise of 40 acres, and I still want my 40 acres and a mule because my granddaddy never got his. But anyways, that's a whole nother conversation. As a part of that freedom, that was a promise of to those African Americans who were set free. But now being able to go to school, being able to get health care, being able to own a home becomes a part of the American dream. There were systems, and I want to just kind of talk about this briefly as we look at that civil rights movement. There were systems that were put in place, and we refer to them as redlining and other things of that nature that kept blacks from certain areas. There were certain things that they would do, and too many blacks were creating wealth in a particular area and living and congregating. Eminent domain would come in, take that land, and then put public transportation, things like railways and things of that nature, through those communities, degrading the value of those properties, and then also putting a chasm between those black or those urban communities and the resources that were necessary for their vitality. So we see all of those things take place. And now I want to talk about something that the Urban League has said, and then we'll get into our real conversation. But I want to put this all in perspective so that we can have this conversation. The National Urban League, which is interesting because I got a call from the president of the Urban League in Detroit, desirous of bringing and creating a partnership with the city of Saginaw for an urban league here. But they did some studies, and what they found in their report is, as they took an in-depth analysis of the economic, political, and social state of African Americans in the U.S., they were able to find that Black Americans remain at a disadvantage in all aspects of life, demonstrating a stark economic inequality and lack of economic opportunity. According to the report, Black Americans are more than twice as likely to be unemployed than their white counterparts, with an unemployment rate. And this is from 2023. And I know these numbers have gone down because I know that the unemployment rate for African Americans at this point is down to about 9%. But it was 10.2%. I think this was May of 2023. And for Black Americans, and for others, it was 4.4% for white Americans. I shouldn't say others. In addition, Black Americans are more likely to be underemployed, with a rate of 19.2% compared to 8.1% for white Americans. That means that if you have a degree, you're working in a non-degree position, or you're taking on a role that is less than what you're qualified to take on. The report also finds that Black Americans experience significantly lower levels of wealth compared to white Americans. That's the wealth gap. The median wealth of a Black family is only 1/10 that of white families. This gap is growing. The wealth gap is growing. The median wealth of white family increasing by 8.1% between 2017 and 2019, while the median wealth of Black families decreased in that same time by 4.2%. I'm not Einstein, but that's about a 12% margin increase over that 2-year period. The report also finds that Black Americans are significantly more likely to be in poverty than whites. In 2019, 22.1% of Black Americans lived in poverty, compared to 8.4% of white Americans. In addition, Black Americans are more likely to experience housing insecurity, with a rate of 35.4%. I know I'm giving you a lot of numbers, compared to 17.9%. That's almost twice the percentage. That is twice for white Americans. So I want to have this conversation about inequalities that are based in racial inequities. And so inequalities that are based in racial inequities, the inequities that are consistent with racial issues, and how they happen. So Jonathan, when you look at these numbers, or you hear me throw out these statistics and these numbers, are these numbers surprising in any way, shape, or form to you?
They are. They're larger. You cannot deny the difference in the living conditions of people in the country. However,
absolutely,
I was just looking up to see if I could find this report, because some of the parameters for these studies can be deceptive.
Okay.
For instance, what is a white American in this study?
Okay.
A lot of these studies include Hispanics, people of Asian descent, also people that, when you think of a white person, what kind of person are you thinking of?
A white person,
like a European, right?
Well, yeah, but not necessarily. I think in most, if you say what is a white person, that would be my description. But what I do also understand is that there are many folks who come here, and just as there was a paper bag test in the old days, if you were light enough, you could pass. That's what black people would do, because there was a benefit to being white, and they would do so. I think that there are a lot of immigrants, especially those that come from the sort of across the southern border, that they have a desire to assimilate to white culture when they get here, and so they identify themselves as white. So the census pulls, or these statistics pull, what people say they are. And so if they live their lives as white individuals in their communities, and that's how they identify. I mean, everybody, we already talked about the identification. We're not going to go down there, but that's how they identify. Then I don't. Yeah.
No, I get that. But when you're looking at reports like this, it's very easy to get upset at the big numbers and not think about exactly what they mean.
What do you mean by that?
Saying that there's a 12% difference growth in the gap between a white American family and a black American family. Did they leave out outliers?
I think that those outliers would be consistent because they would exist on both sides of that spectrum. There would be outliers on one side as well as outliers on the other side.
When you're looking at statistics, though, when you're looking at any major report, there are parameters for, like, when you're going through statistics,
right.
There is, this thing is so out there that it probably shouldn't be contributed to the data set.
No, I get that. And one of the things that we have, when I talk about systemic racism, which my buddy Mark loves to talk about, I'm just joking, he hates it. But one of the things that he often addresses and desires to address is the idea of the growing wealth gap. That is something that is, it's a there. It is a real thing. May there be some wiggle room, this 8.1% and 4.2% change, that maybe it's not 12% or 13%, maybe it's more like 10%. Sure, but it is an indication that there is still a divergence in terms of where the two, where white communities are going versus black communities. And I think that number is staggering to me. And I knew that it was growing, just not at that rate. But I think that for me, the biggest thing is that there is not a direction or a closing of the issue, but there's a widening of the gap, whatever that percentage is.
My point with that was just, I want to know the parameters of this study before I start to pick it apart. That was my only thing, because when you look at these summaries, they can be pretty deceptive.
No, absolutely. And I'll guarantee you, with this being the Urban League, there may have been some outliers that were included. I would agree. I think, but the finding of the fact that there is an evolving and a continuation and a real increase in the wealth gap between what African Americans are making and what white Americans are making is a serious thing.
Now, what do we point to as the cause of that?
Now, that would be the question.
Yep.
When I look at this and in my conversations with other individuals, we understand that when we look at the wealth gap, for most Americans have the majority of, it's changing, but the majority of their wealth comes from home ownership, them owning a home, that home appreciating over time for a long time. And this is when we always talk about how the systems, how racism, and I say this, racism isn't we're not seeing clans and clanmen and all that other stuff anymore, for the most part, unless you go to some very, very rural backwoods places. But what we are seeing are a continuation. Like when we look at things such as how much is the inheritance taxes, how much does a person's wealth grow? When we look at the fact that generationally whites have owned land and property that blacks were excluded from being able to earn or to own, and that was then turned over to a young 20-something when their parents died, or they were given an endowment or a trust fund or whatever that was. Those were the things in which we saw, quote unquote, the head start take place to create a system where the wealth gap would be would be fundamentally created. It's against the law to allow me to have a home ownership, but it's not against the law for me who doesn't own a home to come and repair your floors or repair your roof or to take care of your children. So the value that I would create in my own space, I am now creating value in your space that I'm not giving any benefit. And then at the ending of the life of that master or whoever it is, when they die, there is no value, even though I have investment, there's no return on my investment. And that value then is given to those children. And so that's where this wealth gap was created, and exacerbated over time through policies. The racism is in the policy, through redlining and steering and things of that nature that existed in real estate, inequities in lending. Black folks were not able to obtain loans for a long period of time. And then if you lived in certain communities where there were, trains and highways that brought properties down, but even those things being created in certain spaces were racist in nature to prevent a certain population or a certain neighborhood from growing. And these are things that are statistically proven over time in terms of the outcome of how they had impact on neighborhoods. So if you ask the question, how did this begin? That's how it started.
I get how it started.
Yeah.
Why has that percentage of difference grown in the past 365 days?
I think that that's an interesting question. And I have a perspective. What would you think is the reason? I have my thoughts and I'll share them. But what are your thoughts in terms of why this gap is continually increasing versus decreasing?
I would say that things are generally getting worse.
Okay.
Especially when you look generationally and when you talk about the transfer of property, things are more and more just becoming corporate. Renting is becoming the new normal. And so that's extractive. It is, I'm just like you say, I'm paying money. I'm not getting anything out of it.
Yeah.
In a different light, but it's a similar concept.
Concept.
And with things generally getting worse, if there is a group of people that has had this over generations building up that value, they have something to fall back on. It's not great. They don't like it.
Yeah.
Things are still getting worse for them, but it hits harder for those people that don't have that to fall back on. And I think that in Black communities, there's less to fall back on, which is why you're seeing an increase in that gap.
That's a point that I was not even going to make, but I think that's a very valid point, because when you're creating wealth versus wealth that has been created, you do have what we might say is a cushion. So in this white household, they may have, a bank account with money in account that if, the roof caves in, we can then say, hey, we got this money, let's repair the roof.
Or the grocery bill over the next 12 months increases by 20%.
Or inflation is ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, I think about how people are complaining about inflation, but I'm like, do we take into consideration the impact on inflation, the impact of inflation, and with consideration to the wealth gap? Like, white America is upset about the prices that they're going into grocery stores. And if we keep this in perspective, that there's this huge gap, can you imagine what communities of color, and I say in particular Black communities, are experiencing with the wealth gap? And so I think that's when we talked earlier, we were talking about why some Black communities might have an affinity for Donald Trump. It's not what 50 Cent said. 50 Cent said that Donald Trump now is a felon, so he has something in common with. But I thought that was the most racist thing on the planet. But I think that there is something to the fact of, people's memories are short-sighted. And so, the last time Donald Trump was was president. Now, this is what's funny, is that the coronavirus is the thing that kicked him out of office, right? COVID is the thing that became the bane of his existence, in terms of his election winning that the next year, that and abortion. But what now is going to be the thing that brings him back is the things that he was able to do in the COVID climate. Those checks, which folks were like, why is he taking forever with the checks? Because he wanted to personally put his name on those checks, which would have been great given time and for the, what would you call the regulation or the, what do you call it? The stabilization of the economy and things that were there. We always say when it comes to voting, it's the economy stupid. He was dealing with a COVID economy that was high in terms of unemployment because everybody thought that they were going to die if we came to an office and breathed the same air with individuals, which a lot of people died. But we did not see the numbers go down as fast. So now we're dealing with numbers being down, but people now dealing with inflation from the free checks that we were given, from the free unemployment monies that were out there. And those are things that were necessary to sustain people. But we all know that you can't print money, and there's no, without there being somewhere we got to pay for that money. And I think that we're paying for that money now. But the thing is, people remember that he wrote those checks and he gave them good checks and he helped to put more money in their pockets and they increased the unemployment. So when people are saying we were better under,
real quick,
yes, sir.
It is unfair to slant that as only Donald Trump doing that.
No. But this is,
then people think back to, hey, his name was on those
absolutely
checks, so things are going to be
absolutely
better. I understand the point you're making.
No, that's the point I'm making. And I'm not trying to take the point any further, because I think at the beginning of this conversation, we were saying how much control does a president have?
Yep.
And so we look at those things. And I mean, at that point going in, Democrats were in control when Biden first came into office. They were controlled of both parties, and they did absolutely nothing now, as the Republicans are doing absolutely nothing now. But we somehow place our hope in these single individual men who really don't run the country. So when we look at these types of things, I think that is one thing that is ingratiating so many people, because the fact of the matter is more people had money. Best Buy couldn't keep computers in. Cars were selling off the lot because people were home. They were enjoying life. When you think about that time, you spent more time with family. You were in bubbles, spending time together. Most people had excess money. And now we are living in a time where that inflation is hitting. They have not kept up with the pay of people and the salary increases. And so you desire to go back to a time when it was like, hey, this was much better than what we're experiencing now. But we don't live in a vacuum. I mean, we don't live outside. All of these things are connected, and it's so very important for us to keep those things in mind. But the fact of the matter is, when we look historically at what we're talking about here, that racial gap, that racial disparity, it doesn't just stop with housing prices, even though that's where that wealth comes from. It also comes with being able to enter into spaces of new industry. So if I'm lacking in my education, if there's been generational issues of not being able to speak, to read, Michigan is the slowest reading nation in a country in the state in the nation. Those things are problematic. And if I bet you were to look at it, it would be the I-75 corridor that attends to most of that instability when it comes to literacy. It would be major cities like Detroit, like Flint, and then again, cities like Saginaw. So these things, policy created certain things that are here and then reinforced those things. And then I think now as we look towards emerging technologies, not being equipped, not being able to read, struggling in math are things that exacerbate those problems. So as we look toward a end or a way to curb this increasing gap, we've got to deal with those core areas of education, healthcare, the criminal justice system, and those things will impact the wealth gap. We're going to take a break. I want to have this conversation a little bit more. We'll bring people in to sit down and have a panel to discuss it. But for now, that's all. Take care of yourselves and each other. God bless you all. Grace and peace.